Hello, my name is Gordy Hogue, and this is Community Connections. Each of us has stories that help us to understand and to explain our world. I have been very fortunate to have met many interesting people who have had a positive, profound impact on our community and far beyond. People who have had incredible life experiences and fascinating stories that help us to better understand our world. And they help us to connect with each other. And Community Connections is about those people and about their stories. And I'm sure that you will enjoy meeting these amazing, amazing people as much as I have. Thank you. Enjoy. Welcome to Community Connections. My name is Gordy Hogue, and today's guest is a man who has, with many volunteers, dedicated so much time and energy to restoring the Little Campbell River watershed and its tributaries, to developing and working on a hatchery and trails and habitat and the whole area. They've hosted many visitors for across many years. They're being impacted obviously by COVID, as we all are. But he's, I think, the longest serving president they've had in the Semi-Annual Fish and Game Club over the years. And I'm so delighted to have Bob Donnelly as our guest. Welcome, Bob.
Thanks, Gordy. Again, as Gordy said, I am the president of the Semi-Annual Fish and Game Club. It's a position I've held for probably 11 years by now. It seems to stretch on forever. A resident of South Surrey, came here from Winnipeg 25 years ago. Upon retirement, decided I would like to get involved in fishing, and went down to the Semi-Annual Fish and Game Club, and I was grabbed by a couple of directors who strong-armed me into first becoming treasurer and then becoming president the following year. So it's always been an interesting position, very time-consuming. Again, we're an all-volunteer organization, and we have a very extensive 29-acre complex in South Surrey, and it requires a tremendous amount of effort to maintain and keep that operational. At the same time, continue the role of our organization to restore and protect the Little Campbell River. And as the expansion development expansion within Surrey, particularly South Surrey, over the last few years, this has become a very, very time-consuming position, trying to protect the river from what we see as irresponsible development where we see it. So that takes us into the political field, into briefings with city council, with mayors, with GVRD, attending meetings there, trying to protect the river from development. But first, a little bit of history on the club. It's perhaps one of the oldest all-volunteer organization in the White Rock, South Surrey area. We were founded back in 1956. An initial meeting was held at the White Rock Hotel on Marine Drive. From there, we incorporated the following year, 1957, just a few weeks after White Rock was incorporated. So we have been there for an awful long time. The focus of the group at that time, founding group at that time, was local residents who founded the club. And their focus was in restoring the Little Campbell River that had, to a certain degree, been damaged or decimated by a lot of commercial gravel operations upstream. It had destroyed the salmon beds. So the folks who established the club were local conservation-minded people. Some worked at the border crossing. Other were local residents in what would eventually be South Surrey White Rock area. So the organization had been around for an awful long time, and were successful in clearing the river of debris in the initial years and restoring the gravel spawning beds for the salmon and the trout. This river had been, going back historically, go back into the 1880s, where there was records kept and stories told about the large number of people from Blaine and Bellingham who came up to fish in the Little Campbell River, because it was very, very large number of salmon and trout were in that river at various times of the year. So going back to restore it meant we had to restore, as I said before, the gravel beds. The gravel operations had sealed them, and the salmon could not remove the silt and allow them to spawn. The aim of the club long term was to build, or probably a club facility, preferably very close to the river. And that was always the aim of the club. But they had to spend their first 28 years of operation meeting in various rooms and facilities, rental facilities around the area. That included the White Rock Hotel. It included the White Rock Yacht Club meeting rooms, which were at the Dolphins at the end of the pier. They also were involved in renting space at Earl Marriott School and the library. So they bounced around an awful lot to set up meetings through those 28 years. Many of those facilities and buildings are no longer there. But during that time, they also were into fundraising, trying to raise sufficient funds to acquire property when it became available. That took an awful lot of years before they could eventually find it. That included looking at space with the First Nations, sending with First Nations property, seeing if we could acquire land in that area or use land in that area. The old oyster company grounds as well. So they searched high and low, and they had a building committee set up each year to keep that search. It wasn't until 1978 that they eventually were successful in identifying a piece of property in the Hazelmere Valley that gave them what they wanted. It was a 29-acre piece of property on the banks of the river, off just at 1284 184th Street. There was a greenfield area at that time, so that meant they had to clear and make way for a roadway to get into the property. So that was acquired in 1978. Interestingly enough, the owner of the property would not sell it unless we would take the 40 acres of property to the north, which was pasture land at that time. We didn't have the funds for that, and 4 of the club directors stepped up and mortgaged their houses to raise enough money to buy the other 40 acres, which they were successful in selling off 6 months later. But again, that indicates the dedication of the founding members of the club, who spent all their time and efforts and their money to make this a possibility. So they acquired the property, the 29-acre property. The first thing they did was to build a barn so they could store equipment and things in the barn. And that was the building material for that barn was acquired from the Peace Portal clubhouse. They were tearing down their old clubhouse at that time, and the club volunteers made a bid to go in there and take over the demolition on the basis that they could retain the building material. So that building material was then returned to the club grounds, and they built the barn that we have to this day. So it's always an interesting place to go into to see the old lumber in there and some of the old indications as to where it came from.
That's the Peace Portal golf course, isn't it? The clubhouse at the golf course.
Yes, the golf course. Yes, the Peace Portal golf course. Followed the building of the barn. There was a focus on getting approval from the province and the federal government to build a hatchery, and this was always the main aim. They wanted to build a hatchery building that would also give them a meeting room. And that took an awful lot of effort because there were, particularly the province was very strenuous in insisting that we must have an indication of what the fish levels were in that river. So the only way that could be done was by building a fence across the river during the spawning seasons and count the returning salmon and trout coming back to spawn. First two efforts were unsuccessful. One was use broom handles, believe it or not, were driven into the base of the river to funnel the fish into a trap. That worked for a little while, but the beaver found them and had a liking for the broom handles, and they were chewed through the broom handles, so that failed. So eventually we decided we had to pull our heads together and build a steel fence across the river that could be opened and closed to allow debris to flow through and be closed when the salmon come back to spawn and the trout come back to spawn, and route them into a trap where they be counted. So that design was we come up with that design. The components of that were built at a Cloverdale school, a metal shop. The students who actually built the components under the direction of one of our club members who's a teacher there. The components were brought back to the club, and the fence was erected across the river with a cement base that required the diversion of the river for a period of time to get that built. But that now works and continues to this day being operational. We're counting about 5,000 salmon and trout coming up the river every year, and feeding them through the trap so they can be counted by species and by numbers. The design of that fence has also been accepted by Department of Fisheries and Oceans as a prototype for similar operations across the province. And we've had a number of hatchery operators in the US come up and look at the facility and the fence as well. So it's been a very popular aspect of the club because people can come down and see the fish being counted when they come back to spawn. Following the fence construction in 1984, we got approval from DFO and the province to start the construction of the hatchery. That was completed, I think, in 1984, 1985, when it was finally completed, built by club volunteers with a great amount of support from the White Rock Lions Club at that time. So that was led to the building of the hatchery. We raise about over 100,000 salmon and trout in that hatchery each year, back when we started in 1984. And it allows us, we raise the fish in the hatchery in an incubation room where we take the milk and the eggs from the broodstock we catch at the fish fence and raise them in the hatchery before we eventually release them into the river, probably and sometimes up to a year later. So it's been a very productive facility. We continue to go through upgrades into the hatchery operation. So that has been really the heart and soul of the club, has been a hatchery. That's why they raised the money. That's what the vision was of this club. Fish and Game Club is the name given to our club. But again, the focus has always been on the fishing aspect, maintaining the river, as well as allowing us to have school tours into the facility and educate the young people on the iconic Pacific salmon that populate that river. Each year we have close to 100 classes come through the hatchery operation. We take fertilized eggs from the hatchery to schools in Surrey, White Rock, and Richmond and Delta, where the children raise them in aquariums in their classrooms. The aquariums are provided by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. And when they hatch them into the fry stage in the spring, they come back and release them into the river. So that's always an enjoyable time to have the young people, the elementary classes, come in, and we spend a fair amount of time with them when they're at the hatchery. We take them on tours of the nature trails and hopefully see some some of the mink or the other end of the beaver that also populate the river throughout the year. So that's been again the focus. We did move on from the hatchery to in probably 1994. It took about 3-4 years to construct, so the completion date is always a question. But we built a large hall complex up another side of the river from the hatchery operation. That the main hall seats 220 people, so it's a very large complex with meeting rooms upstairs. And in the basement, we have an archery range, indoor archery range, as well as a 22 target rifle for the junior members to participate in that. So that was the final thing that the club has constructed. So that is complete, and so we're sitting on what is a very multi-million-dollar facility by now, or a complex by now, that's open to the public, and they can come down at any time and walk the nature trails. And if someone's around the hatchery, they can get an opportunity to watch the hatchery operation. Or if they're down in the fall, when the rains come in, late in the September, early October through November, they can see the fish being counted at the fish fence. So again, it's a very complex organization. It takes an awful lot of volunteers to keep it operational. And it's something I think we're very proud of. And it's something that's certainly an asset to the South Surrey and White Rock area.
Indeed, I think we're all very, very proud of the work you've done there. I remember coming, is it Father's Days that you used to have?
Used to the Father's Day barbecues, yes, we would have and some years we were up to 900 people came down to that. We haven't had in the last year because of an issue with the fish, but we keep looking back at that because that always was not necessarily a big fundraiser for us, but it simply brought the community in.
Yeah, that is a great community event that would happen. Now, Bob, as a nonprofit society and running a hatchery that's pretty unique, I think, isn't it, in British Columbia? How many other nonprofit organizations and volunteers would be participating in fish rehab as you have been?
I think what happened, Gordy, was the Department of Fisheries and Oceans started up as a salmon and community effort set where they were trying to encourage communities to get involved in the raising of salmon. This kept around about 1980, and that led to us taking advantage of that program to build our hatchery. So our hatchery was the first all-volunteer hatchery in the province. There's now 60 of them, but this was the very first, and one of the very few that operate on a year-round basis.
And without the pandemic, how many visitors would you generally get coming there over the course of a year?
Well, there'd be thousands of people come down and tour the grounds. And of course, there's always, because the hall was used for a lot of community events and for family events, in addition to club events, there was probably thousands and thousands of people would attend the grounds just to participate in either social events or something in the hall. Right now, we're still seeing a large number of visitors who come down to strictly walk the trails during the pandemic issue, but certainly reduced from what it was before.
And when you talked a little bit about the early going, and remember, for years, Bob Oswald lived on the property there and contributed significantly.
Yeah, Bob was the first hatchery manager. And managing that hatchery is a very large job. Bob had retired and he moved a trailer home onto the property and lived on the property. So he was there, I guess I think it was 2013 that he retired. So, but he was on site in 1984, right through to 2013 when he finally retired from being the hatchery manager and moved back to live with family in the interior.
So what impact has the pandemic had on the whole operations of the facility through this period of time?
It's we're fortunate in having some our focus, we've shut down the hall operation. We've shut down the archery program. We do have an outside archery range that we allowed to continue with social distancing and masks, but the whole activities, the weddings, the meetings, the celebrations of life, all those obviously had to be canceled, as well as our Sea Cadet program and the Air Cadets who come in. So all that has been shut down. We still obviously have to maintain the property and maintain the hatchery in particular. That has to keep up and operational. So we have reduced down to about probably around 15 to 20 regular hatchery volunteers are on site on Saturdays. And then we have a few down during the week to maintain the salmon stock we have in there right now. So it's a cutback, but we've been very, very busy. We've just finished repainting all the hatchery buildings. In the past weekend, we've changed 2 of our rearing tubs inside the hatchery. We've replaced them with new ones devoted. They were donated by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. That meant taking the wall out of the hatchery and taking the old tanks out and put the new ones in. A very, very big job we started last weekend. We've also had to repair our big coho rearing pond, concrete rearing pond, after the heavy flooding we had this year. The cracks in that facility had widened, and we were concerned because the water table had risen so high. So we've had to spend several weeks in the pond after it was drained in repairing the cracks. A very extensive operation, but we're up and running there again. So we've been very busy keeping things going. Of course, we have to still maintain the building and the trails and the grounds.
And so through the course of time, you've had to deal with 3 levels of government and all kinds of issues and support there. Where do you see the future of the St. Malo Fish and Game Club if you were to look 25 years out in terms of the issues and concerns? I know finance is always a challenge with nonprofits, and you've done such a wonderful job of developing a number of other resources on site that makes it more difficult during the pandemic to get any income through that. And I'm sure they're, like many nonprofits, having concerns now.
Yeah, it certainly had an impact on us because we had a large number of events, as we have each year, booked into the hotel, or into the hall. But that had to be terminated, and we had to refund all that money back to those groups. So that had a significant impact on us. We've been very frugal in trying to find other sources of funding, and we've been successful in some of those to try and offset that loss. We did have the Canadian National Indoor 3-dimensional archery competition was being hosted by our archery group, and that was canceled at the last minute because of the virus. But the folks there have been able to recover all the money we had spent on that event, so that's helped. So we've been working very hard to get that to keep ourselves in a strong financial position. We always keep a fund for eventualities like this or for other major repairs. So we've been able to hold our line and not have to go to the bank for any money.
So what do you have any sort of longer term goals that are laid out now? I know at one point there was talk of how we might be able to negotiate with levels of government in terms of being able to have a little Campbell walkway or estuary designated right up to Arosha and to the Langley border, and to looking at some type of expansions like that. Are those things that are still being contemplated?
They are, Gordy. There is, with the change city government, we find it's maybe changing a bit there. But up until the last election, there were some activities along that stretch of the river between the club and Arosha. And there was the cemetery expansion took place up there at 192nd. That as part of that, that we were involved, as we are in all planning applications on the riverbank. So we were involved in that process, and as what came out of that was that the owners of the cemetery donated a number of acres of land on both sides of the river to the city for park space. So that was good. Of course, as our property, then there's next door to us to the east is the city park, which is a habitat park that very few people know about. So that's 5 acres attached to ours. So we're hopeful that the property between what is the cemetery and what is the city's property and our property, that we can try and put some assurances in there that that will protect the riverbanks and permit a walkway space. What the city was doing was not allowing bridges across the river, so anybody had property on both sides of the river. If they came to develop, they would have to have the setback on one side of the river and probably be encouraged to donate the land on the other side. So there is hope there, but we're just finding a little bit of with the current administration, we're finding there seem to be loosening some of the controls that are in place. So we'll just have to keep watching that.
Yeah. Well, it certainly is a wonderful vision to have it coming right from Samiamu Bay right up to at least to the Langley border. You've got Samiamu First Nations and Peace Portal and running out and into your land. It's a wonderful vision of what could be a wonderful legacy to the people of this community and province, and indeed for the whole world in terms of the example that's set with the boundary. Yeah, such an important part of the estuary and fish life.
Yeah, we keep trying to encourage the planning department of the city to protect as much of the riverbanks as we can, and certainly that would be a tremendous trail because there's some interesting animal life along that. I think even last year, over a 12-month period, we counted 126 species of birds just on our property. So it's a tremendous biodiversity in there, and carrying that through our property up to Arosha and down to the First Nations would certainly make a very attractive facility.
And you've done some work on the tributaries. You did some recent work connecting some of the south off Highway 99 and back into the Little Campbell as well.
Yeah, since going back, which is the very first one we did, we took in the plan to restore all the tributaries of Little Campbell, certainly in the South Surrey, and that started way back in probably around 78, 76, where we restored Jenkins Creek, which is just off of 8th Avenue. Since then, we've been active in restoring all the tributaries, and their most recent one was we got the support of the city and in the province in the restoration of the creek that runs down along, because it's along King George at 184th, right up to 16th Avenue. So we've been very successful in doing that, as well as other tributaries. And those now we put spawning gravel into those, and we're now seeing a lot of salmon and trout spawning in those creeks as well.
So if there's anybody, some of the people watching this who might know some people who might want to volunteer, I'm sure you've got lots of space to accept volunteers who might be interested in the wonderful work that you're doing, and they can go to the website of Samiamu Fish and Game Club and make contact there. And it's just a wonderful story of people in this community from going back, as you say, into the 1950s, who were concerned about this river, and through them and through the many volunteers and through your leadership more recently, we've got a tremendous resource in this community and a tremendous place for teaching. As you pointed out, there are many students that go there, and I can remember our son going there and getting a chance to learn and to understand. And the more awareness we can bring to more people, I think the better off our environment's going to be as a result of that. So, Bob, thank you so very much for all of the work that you've put into that, you and the volunteers, and the vision you've had and the actions you've taken. Thank you for joining us today on Community Connections. Please tune in to our next show as more amazing people share their wonderful stories. If you haven't already, please click on the red subscribe button below, right down there and view our updates. Feel free to leave any thoughts or comments that you may have. We're always trying to do a better job of connecting this wonderful community. Thanks again for joining, and until next time, keep connecting. Thank you.